My name's Michael Guerin. I'm the program manager of Smart Docklands. So Smart Docklands is a smart city testbed in Dublin City. I'm going to give you a little bit of the projects we have in the Docklands and some of the technology that we're trialing and testing. So as I said, Dublin's smart city testbed. But before we get into Smart Docklands, I want to give you a bit of background on Smart Dublin. It's an initiative of the 4 local authorities in Dublin, so Dublin City Council and then the 3 regional local authorities. The idea is that we want to bring smart city technology to the whole region. This is some things that we would consider smart city technology in Dublin already. So the big belly bins you may see around the city, the real-time passenger information for the buses, Dublin bikes. We also now have Bleeper bike and Moby bike, and we have the Leap card, which you can use on 7 different modes of transport. So we do have smart city technology in Dublin, but a couple of years ago we wanted to take a little bit more of an agile approach. So we decided to designate the Docklands area as our smart city testbed. This is roughly the area we're talking about. It's about 2.5, 3 square kilometres in the centre of the city. Some stats in the area: there's 44,000 people employed there and 26,000 residents. There's over 3 billion private investment between now and 2025, and it's home to over 500 businesses, some of which you will probably recognise. So Google employ 8,000 people there currently, and they've just taken a number of new buildings on Barrow Street, so that will certainly increase. Facebook employ 5,000, Accenture have their connected building, Airbnb have their innovation hub. So about 3 years ago, we decided to try and work with these companies a little bit better from a city council perspective. So we started the Smart Docklands network. So we got each of these companies in a room, some of the research centres, and we asked them what they were working on and how Dublin could work with them a bit better. This network is part of a much wider network within Smart Docklands, so we play a kind of independent broker role in a much wider network of stakeholders. You probably won't be able to make this out, but we have different groups there: property and developers. We work with 6 different residents groups, tourism and hospitality, physical infrastructure. We work with a number of different cities across the world as well. But Smart Docklands is structured in three layers, so connectivity and infrastructure being the most important layer, engagement, and then the projects on top of that. So some of these you will probably recognise. 3G and 4G we have on our phones at the minute. 5G is coming down the track, Wi-Fi, fibre, and then LPWAN, which these are IoT networks, so LoRaWAN, Sigfox, and NB-IoT. So I'll give you some examples of how we use them in a minute. But the one project we're focusing on at the minute is 5G. We engaged with a company called Dense Air in the summer of 2017. We wanted to look at gigabit speed connectivity in the city and how we might use the city's assets to deploy a 5G network. The main reason we need to do this is 4G signal at the minute travels from the tops of a building for a couple of kilometres, so you don't need as many towers. So you'll probably look up in Dublin, you'll see towers in the tops of buildings. There's one just off Dame Street. But 5G signal only travels about 300 or 400 metres, so you're going to need a number of antennas all the way down the street. So you're going to have to start using traffic lights and street lights. So we engaged in this project to understand how we might do that. So as I mentioned, we're deploying them on traffic lights and street lights. We have deployed about 20 small cells at the minute, so this is what they look like, that small grey box. It's certainly not the most glamorous of things, but getting these 20 small cells on a lamppost has taken about 18 months, working with ESB and Dublin City Council and a number of different partners. This is actually a first of its kind in the world, so it's the first of its kind small cell neutral host network. So the idea of this network is, instead of having one piece of equipment for every different operator, you can have one piece of equipment that propagates the signal of all operators. So instead of having one for Vodafone 3 and Air, you could just have one piece of equipment, which makes a real difference in terms of wind load on the pole and all types of things like that. We're also deploying the small cells indoors, so this is what they look like. It just looks like a large alarm clock. We have a couple of these in buildings around the Docklands, working with some partners like iPut and Hibernia Rate. I'm not sure if there's anyone here today from those companies. But the idea is we want to build up to Euro 2020 next year. So Euro 2020 is the European Football Championships. Next year, it's not in one country. They're decided to run it in 12 different countries, which has been a bit of a logistical nightmare, I've been told. So we want to work with them around the fan zones and around the stadium to deploy a 5G network and see how that might improve fan experience. So as I mentioned, engagement is a large part of this, and feeding into what Carol said earlier, I think we're 4 out of the 5 trends you mentioned we have in this presentation, which is good. So engagement with communities is the first piece. We were doing a lot with the tech and startup community and a lot with the universities and research centres, but we decided to engage with community groups and residents and business owners. So we broke them down into a number of different stakeholder workshop groups. These are the different groups here. So physical infrastructure bodies, those who look after roadways and waterways. Hospitality and tourism is a big thing in the Docklands. So we have the 3 Arena, which is our biggest indoor concert venue, the National Convention Centre, Epic, the CHQ, and a lot of hotels. Residents groups, as I mentioned, we work with 6 of them, and developers and property owners. So to date, we've run 12 workshops, just over 200 attendees facilitated by these guys. The idea of the workshop was to give them an understanding of what smart cities are and how it impacts them. So to tell residents about the big belly bins outside their door, or about the new bike sharing schemes, or things that they might interact with. For the developers, it was interesting to hear how they might enable their building with 5G before other buildings, which is why Hibernia and iPut got involved. But that was the first 30 minutes. The next 90 minutes was to tell us all of your challenges and problems that you face in the Docklands. So we now have a list of about 300 problems, which we're working through. We certainly opened a can of worms with that one. But we've been able to break them down into like 11 main themes. So we use this as the basis for our work plan. So we don't just test technology for the sake of it. We want to make sure that the problem actually exists in the Docklands. Then we go to the market and look for solutions. We have a number of different ways of doing this. One of our more popular ways is through a mechanism called SBIR. So this is in partnership with Enterprise Ireland. To date, we've put out 9 challenges. So you can see there: cycling, flooding, wayfinding, illegal dumping, last mile delivery, etc. So we're working with 42 startups, and we funded them just over 1.5 million. So that's a larger mechanism we use. Another mechanism we use is just direct challenges. So as part of Velo City, which was the Global Cycling Conference, which was held in Dublin here in June, we decided to run a Smart Cycle Tech Challenge, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second. But some of the projects we have on in this, certainly not a very glamorous project, but one of our bigger ones. This is trying to predict flooding in Dublin, so using low-cost sensors to try and predict flooding. So the sensor you can see on the left-hand side there is the one Dublin City Council use at the minute. I mentioned earlier about the networks that are used for IoT, so LoRa, which is there, Sigfox and NB-IoT. Essentially what they do is send really small amounts of data, so you can deploy a sensor on a battery for 10 to 15 years. So the way it used to work for Dublin City Council is they had to have a box connected to the sensor with a SIM card in it, and because the SIM card uses so much energy, it had to be connected to mains power. But because of these new types of networks, we can deploy a sensor connected to a battery in really hard to reach locations. The sensors are also about 10% of the price of previous sensors, so we're starting to deploy a really dense network of rainfall and river level and water velocity sensors. So if we know there's X amount of rainfall in the Dublin Mountains, it's coming down at whatever speed, and it's filling up in Ringsend or Ballsbridge, could we potentially start to notify residents that there will be flooding in the area? Another type of flooding happens on street because drains get blocked like this. This is a fairly common sight in cities. So we're working through the SBIR mechanism I mentioned earlier with a company called Denalto to develop low-cost sensors so we know when these drains are full. So a lot of these drains get blocked by leaves and different things. Dublin City Council don't actually know which ones are blocked. So if we know which ones are blocked and we know there's going to be a large rainfall event tomorrow, we can go to the ones that are blocked and clear them out before the rainfall happens, which reduces on-street flooding. Another project we have, I mentioned the big belly bins earlier. You've probably seen them around the city. To give you a bit of background on the big belly bin, they have a solar panel on the roof of it, and they compress the rubbish, so you can fit about 5 times as much rubbish in the bin. The other benefit to them is that they have a sensor in it to let you know when the bin is full. So this is a screenshot of what the dashboard looks like in the Docklands. So we replaced the bins that were there with 110 smart bins. We've reduced waste collection in the Docklands by 87%, which is obviously quite significant. The reason being, Dublin City Council used to go around every bin 2 to 3 times a day because they had no idea of knowing which one was full and which wasn't. Each of the red pins in this map is the bins that actually need emptied. So instead of going around all the bins all day, they can just go to the, as you can see there, 12 bins that actually need emptied. This app will optimize the route for the waste collection team, and then they can do that for an hour or 2 hours, and then it creates a lot of efficiencies, obviously, within the City Council. Another project using AI, as Carol mentioned earlier, is a smart bike light. This is to try and understand cycling in the city. You can see the bike light up there. It's essentially a very small light. It's smart. It benefits a cyclist because it flashes brighter when a cyclist brakes and is approaching roundabouts. So it's just safer for the cyclist. But from a city perspective, there's a number of sensors in it. So it can detect road surface quality and poor road surface quality. It can also detect where the cyclists are moving, so you can see the kind of heat map of where the most cyclists are. We did partner with Google for this project, which is why most people are going to Barrow Street, so it's slightly skewed. But some of the data coming back, we can start to understand how cyclists are reacting in the city. How long they're waiting at junctions. Are they waiting at junctions? Some junctions much longer than other junctions. This is also being used now. So there's 3 areas that Dublin City Council are investing heavily in cycling infrastructure, one of them being the Fitzwilliam Street. So trying to understand how cyclists react there currently. So based on the data out of this project, Dublin City Council are actually making 2 changes to their plans that they had for cyclists, so they can see if a lot of cyclists are taking a right turn even though they're not supposed to. Well, if they're going to do it anyway, could we put in safer cycling infrastructure for them? Another problem that we face in the Docklands, this came through the workshops, was about 35 of these life rings get stolen every week in Dublin. Yeah, apparently most of them end up in hotels after stag do's. So it's obviously a real problem. There's a team of people that walk around and check these on a weekly basis, but they check which are missing, they then write it down, they report it, and then they replace them. So they could be missing for quite a few weeks at a time. So we're about to put out a tender to trial 3 or 4 different solutions so that we know exactly when they've been taken and they can be replaced much quicker, and also to try and reduce the number that are taken. I mentioned the Smart Cycle Tech Challenge earlier. We had companies from, I think, 12 different countries apply to this. These are the 4 companies we decided to work with. So one of them is called Cycle. Some of them are very high tech, some of them aren't exactly, but this is an interesting thing. It's just indicator lights for cyclists. So a lot of people won't cycle because they won't put up their hand because they don't feel safe doing it in the city. This is just an indicator light. This is a cargo trailer, so we're trialing these. A lot of people will cycle, but then they still own a car in a city because they have to do their grocery shopping. So could we have things like this where people could cycle to the grocery store, put their groceries in the back of the trailer, and then cycle home, and then have these types of things to rent in the city? Another app is a cycler's app. So you have Google Maps at the minute. It'll tell you where to go based on the fastest route, but it's not necessarily the safest route for cyclists. So these guys are mapping the safest and greenest routes to cycle in cities. So we're about to launch this with the Dublin Cycling Campaign to try and improve where people are cycling in the city. Second last one, I think this is again to improve cycling safety. We've deployed about 70 of these around the city. It's the small panel you can see at the top of the pole there. It's a radar panel that essentially can detect 300 meters from the traffic lights, so it can start to count and classify vehicles. So it can determine whether it's a bus, a cyclist, a pedestrian, a car. It can also determine what speed it's going at. So we're actually using it at this junction to prioritize cyclists. So if a cyclist is approaching the junction at whatever speed, and if it will make it there, if the light extends by 2 more seconds, based on its speed, the green light will extend for 2 more seconds to let the cyclist through, and then it'll turn red. So we're trying to improve cycling infrastructure on an almost live basis. And then the last project I'm going to talk about is our work around smart buildings. So the 3 kind of main trends we can see is around energy, wellness, and connectivity, and the 3 main ratings. Dublin last year was the fastest growing place for wired score in Europe. But also some of the stuff we're doing is around 3D modeling. So this is a nice aerial image of Dublin. Some of these buildings are actually 3D models, those ones I've highlighted there. The main reason I show you this, we in Dublin City Council decided to put out a tender last year to build a 3D model of the Docklands. This is what the first version looked like. So you can see it was pretty good. We put it into a VR engine to try and understand how the city might use it. The model has improved since then. So this is just a bit of a comparison of, this obviously isn't the model, this is an aerial drone video, but a comparison of what the drone footage is to the 3D model. which it'll change now. So I think from the city's perspective, we wanted to understand, if we built a model like this, who would use it? What would the benefits be? Would developers use it? Would people use it for citizen engagement? What types of people would use it? We also have acknowledged that there's a number of different ways of modeling buildings. So some of these we had the plans for, but other ways we tried to use is LiDAR scanning and 3D point cloud scanning. So you can see the arch on the left-hand side there. This is what it looks like using the point cloud scanning. So we're using different types of scanning to understand how we might model the city. So to build a model of the CHQ building, for those of you who don't know it, it's a very intricate building. It's a cast iron building. It's 200 years old. To build this model, I was told would take a couple of weeks, but we were able to take the footage of this building with the camera in 3 hours, and in about an hour and a half of processing this, and we had a point cloud model of the CHQ. So it's about, for us, it's about trying to understand how we model things differently, and then this is just a comparison of the detail in the model. So we, I'm not sure that, oh, can I go back? And then this is what Dublin City Council are now using the model for. So outside the convention centre, you'll probably know it's a bit of a pinch point for pedestrians and cyclists. So Dublin City Council are exploring putting in a new bridge here. So you can see the two new proposed bridges. So there's actually 3 bridges proposed in the Docklands at the minute. This is the plans for the pedestrian and cycling bridge. But there's also 2 bridges to go across the Liffey. This is what they will look like whenever this changes. So what we're trying to understand is how people would react to this type of, so if we can show citizens what these new bridges will look like, how they would feel about them. I think it is going to show it. Yeah, it is. So this new bridge that you can see when you go underneath the Samuel Beckett Bridge is a pedestrian and cycle bridge. So what we want to do from a city council perspective is show people this using VR and AR, potentially put it into a cycling, an engine that we can incorporate cycling and VR to see how people would react with this new type of bridge. So you can see what the plans look like there. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is we opened up this 3D model for anybody to use at a hackathon from the 10th to the 12th of May. So this model is open source and anybody can use it. These were some of our partners at the event. 2 of the winning solutions, one of which happened to be Carol's solution with Place Engage. So one of the idea being here that you could use AR to look at different models of our different planning propositions in the city. So if there was a bit of contention over maybe a 7 versus a 9-story building, you could look at 7 and look at 9 and then see how people feel about it. So standing across the river or beside the building, but using AR, see what the building looks like in the real scenario, and then the citizens can give feedback via this app. And I believe this app is being developed even further now. So maybe Carol will talk a little bit about that later. And also Dublin Fire Brigade using it. So using it to better plan their responses. So trying to understand where alarm panels are, hydrants, risers, etc., before they get to the area, so they can plan their response a little bit better. And lastly, just some of the impact that we've had over the last 12 months. We're working with the British Council to understand how universities can play a role in smart cities. We were a finalist at the World Smart City Awards. Smart Docklands was listed as #1 for strategy in the Smart Locations of the Future, which is an FDI Financial Times piece, and we won at the World Small Cell Awards for social impact. And that's everything on Smart Docklands. I think we're doing a panel after, so if anybody has any questions, feel free to fire them out then.